Welcome back, sailors, to the world of Eternum. It's finally time to dive into the recent IGN event that featured New World. During this event, the IGN staff were able to team up with David Verifaelli and Michael Willett, who are both a part of the Amazon Game Studios staff. This event featured a full experience of the 50v50 war mode and gave us some more insight on how the experience will play out in game. It first starts off with the attacking side pushing hard on the various 3 points. They gave them completely kitted out characters with a lot of high level equipment in their inventory, which we were able to get a brief look at every time they opened it. The battle was raging on in pure chaos, with people placing down inferno traps, dropping down entire meteor strikes, and making use of what definitely appears to be the healing staff. One thing I found extremely interesting is some of the tactics the defending side used while focusing down the enemy siege engines. At one point during the battle, they made use of powder kegs to blow a couple of cannons sky high. I hadn't expected that to be so effective, but now I think that's something I will definitely be using in the future. For other siege engines, we got to see them making use of the cannons, the ballistas, repeaters, the fire droppers, and we even get to see a couple points of them using the fire launcher platforms. They were super effective at putting pressure on the enemy capture points and did not seem to do any friendly fire. This means if your team is actively trying to push a point, you'll want to make use of these if no one else will. For the weapons, we get to see very small and quick showcases for most of them in both rounds of the war. For weapons that I never saw during the battle, we never saw the spear, the rapier, the greatsword, the great axe, the gauntlets, the pistol, the halberd, or the one-handed mace from the previous alpha, and that also includes not seeing them in anyone's inventory. I'm hoping that we'll at least get half of these implemented before beta, but if we don't see some of them, that could mean that they're still working on them and getting them ready to go. Now for which weapons we did see, let's talk about some of the cool skills we saw from each one. For Fire Staff, I was able to notice quite a few. I watched people channel what appears to be a meteor strike, which looks like it locks them in place while they're raining down hell from above. At one point, someone was able to execute a fire-infused dash, which also ended up pushing this character away. And of course we saw people using it as a flamethrower, similar to what we saw in the PC gamer footage, plus a skill that caused a person to summon a big flaming aura that caused a lot of damage to those in its surroundings. For the auto attack itself, we see that for the Fire Staff it appears to lock players in place. This also requires that you 100% lead your shot, and ultimately I feel like it might actually end up leaving you in an exposed state. I do like the skill for the Fire Staff, but I prefer magic systems where we can move while casting, at least to a certain degree. I can completely understand not being able to move while casting a meteor strike, but moving while auto attacking would be really nice. For the two-handed hammer, this one appears to be an all-around powerhouse. At certain points of the footage, it was difficult to see which skills were coming from who, but from what we did see, the first thing I noticed about this hammer was the repeatable ground pound skill that left enemy players in the dirt. The weapon seems very powerful actually, especially compared to the musket, which I assumed would have had more base power to compensate for the reload time. If we look at the musket's auto attack shots for instance, they were doing about 1.2k damage to this player named Irish Pride, who appeared to be wearing light or medium armor, as opposed to the hammer stacking up to 2.6k damage per hit with that one skill, and also both the bow and arrow plus the one-handed sword getting close to the same amount of damage as the musket. I feel like for the musket it might need a slight buff in terms of its auto attack, but we'll get back to that in a second. What we also saw for the hammer is this poor sap trying to cast a meteor that gets clocked in the face by this madman holding the weapon. We also get to see its auto attack animations at the very end, which do seem to lock you in place, but at the same time feel a little bit easier to control than the Fire Staff. The Warhammer is already turning out to be a powerhouse in terms of crowd control and sheer strength, also demonstrated by this ground pound ability we see briefly during the war. Now for the sword and shield weapon, these players proved to be the front liners. These guys were pushing under their capture points, the gates, and disrupting the Fire Staff plus range users whenever possible. The sword and shield seem very effective at canceling animations for other players to prevent meteor strikes and projectile shields from the life staff. Their auto attack seems to be the best one I've seen thus far. It does close to the same amount that the other weapons do, and for its heavy strike, in some cases we see it stack up to 2k or more, and it appears to execute faster than some of the others do. I've also seen it knock people down entirely during this footage, plus the light attacks are capable of staggering, so they would really excel at locking people into place. Only thing about that though, is that if you're getting attacked from like 2 or 3 of these guys, it seems like it's very difficult to get out of it if you're cornered, especially if you have no more stamina to dodge or block. Which is also another reason I think it'd be great if the attribute known as Constitution gave you stamina to help defend against stuff like this, and stay in the fight longer before having to recover. For the skills, the first one I noticed appeared to be a 15-second defensive buff that triggers a long cooldown and a shield effect on the buff bar. This one is going to be used for decreasing the total damage your character is receiving, and is the one that I personally recommend taking if you're planning on doing territory war. We also see a 1 vs 1 fight between 2 sword and shield users, which is a great showcase of the other skills we'll have under our belt. The fight starts off with player 1 initiating an auto attack combo, followed by the whirlwind ability that combos very easily into the rotation. Then he gets shield charged and knocked on his butt, with the enemy player attempting a whirlwind but missing, and then attempting to follow up with the gap closer ability we've seen, but then it gets cancelled by a shield bash to the face. We then notice that player 2 is stunned while being hit by a heavy attack, and then tries to outlast the defensive buff that player 1 just activated. I think I'd rank this one as being one of the more important weapons to have in territory wars, alongside Warhammer when it comes to melee. We actually didn't get to see much of the throwing axe aside from this character attacking the gate, but luckily we have seen the skill tree for it, and during previous footage we got the chance to check out some of its skills. We know just like before that players who use it will be able to use multiple throwing skills, and with the weapon's very quick paced auto attacks, this could be another one that could be very useful for staggering people in place. I will say though that from what we've seen from the other 2 melee weapons in this fight in comparison, that I would currently rate the throwing axe on the lower side of usefulness in wars, but we also don't know what the blue aura buff we've seen in previous footage actually does for it, so this could actually prove to be an extremely useful weapon for small skirmish PvP. For bow and arrow, this one appears to be the range weapon that truly shines for single target DPS in wars opposed to musket. The range on them seems very decent, and like we've said before, they appear to be doing almost as much damage or the same amount as the musket. We don't get to see anyone really casting skills per se, but we already know from previous developer diaries that the bow is capable of using rapid fire, a rain of arrows skill, and also what appears to be a spread shot. So far I'm thinking the bow is going to be most useful for picking off healers and fire mages without having to get too close. I feel like musket in comparison is more useful on the defending side, where you can use the elevation to your advantage, but as an attacker, it feels like using a bow is going to be more useful. It feels more mobile and in control than the staff users, so you'll probably have an easier time getting away from axe, hammer, and sword users as opposed to playing a mage. We also see during the footage what appears to be a smoke bomb, and I would imagine this one comes from either the bow users or the muskets. And now, we get to talk about one of my favorites, the healing staff. During the start of the battle, we get a brief look at the skill icons in the bottom right row. I do wish they had opened the skill menus for each weapon, or at least a few of them at one point in time, but maybe that'll come from the upcoming Weapon Mastery dev blog. Along with these icons, we also see the consumables right above, featuring the mana and health tinctures, along with some food buffs at the very end. During the presentation, we see most of the players making use of all of these, and the life staff users appear to be equally, if not more useful to the entire armies. Very first thing I noticed is the telegraph placement of the healing wave skill. This one takes a couple of seconds to cast once you've chosen an area, but appears to be a good way to provide healing over time. This is also another skill we've seen during previous footage, but we were unable to 100% confirm it until now. We also see that apparently, they have access to their very own healing beam, which the IGN staff refers to as Siphon. I've seen them try to cast this ability at another point during the footage, and it looks like it does not auto-lock onto people while casting. You have to aim it, and hope that person doesn't move too much until it connects. This means as a healer, with both Healing Wave and the Siphon, you'll have to be very careful with your aim. One wrong move and someone could end up dying as a result. And as a non-healing player, it'll be important to be aware of who's around you. And if you need to go back for support, you might want to stand still when you reach them. We only get to briefly look at each character's stats, but we do see the Siphon healing for about 137 points per tick. This skill might end up being very useful for healing people in one-on-one fights, or people that are about to get dogpiled. It also seems to drain your mana really fast, so healing might end up being one of the hardest things to do in territory war, if this Siphon is the main thing we use. One thing we also see from the life staff users at several points during the footage is this channeled energy base field. It can be hard to recognize what it's for at first, but this is actually used for absorbing projectiles, and not only does it absorb them from the fire staff users or muskets and bowmen, but also siege engines. So like we talked about earlier how a fire siege platform would be really good for putting pressure on a capture point, that projectile shield acts as a direct counter to it, as long as the healer keeps it up. This automatically shoots them up to being one of the most useful types of weapons we can bring, despite the issues with the Siphon spell. The auto attack we only see very briefly during the footage, but it seems like it follows the same rules of the fire staff on how it'll lock you into place. I'm starting to warm up to the magic system, but I really can't help but wish that we could either cast our auto attacks while moving, or have a reduced animation when it locks us in place. For the last weapon though, we can briefly touch on the musket. This one does seem like it's really useful for the defending side, except it really does seem to suffer from having weak auto attacks. It kind of feels more like a support weapon, and we don't really see people making use of its skills during the battle, except for one specific part. Player 1 is engaging on this musket-wielding foe and ends up getting a couple shots in to stagger him, until the enemy throws down a bear trap. It does lock the first player in place, which could be pretty useful in 1v1s or small skirmish, but then the next part takes it further. After laying down an extra, he appears to throw 2 sticky bombs that detonate after a certain amount of time. Those of you who used to play Halo are probably going to have a field day with this one. Does a good chunk of damage too, and CCs him. The only thing though is how close the musket wielder had to be to use that properly. I could see that doing a lot of damage to a mage or healer, but it seems pretty situational to get them to step on the trap, plus you have to be right there in the middle of the fray to do this. Other than that though, we'll have to see what they end up doing with this weapon. So far, I really like what we're seeing from the war system. A lot of potential strategies to use in this mode, and it seems crazy enough to be able to have a good time in. I would love to see them introduce other modes that maybe act as battlegrounds with a similar setup, but no walls, engines, or items. Or harkening back to a previous topic, open world points of interest or forts on the map similar to Elder Scrolls Online Cyrodiil would be pretty cool to see. Something that PvP based players can do throughout the day to get close to, or this exact same experience. And for just a couple small details I noticed, when they open up their inventories, we can see in the top left corner what appears to be the armor weight system that we went over before. Because this person is wearing lighter armor, it puts them in the normal class, which means they can dodge properly instead of just strafing if they were heavy. Also in the bottom left, looks like we'll have 3 total slots for satchels, and since those are tier 5, at level 60 with 3 of those, it looks like our total inventory weight will stack up to 1.2 thousand. Make sure to remember, as a crafter or someone who gathers, it might be very useful going for these before you start leveling your life skills, just as food for thought. Now with that folks, that's all we have to go over regarding the IGN coverage. The developer interview with Michael Willett and David Verfaelli that followed after was just a general description of how New World and its content will function. If you're looking for a more in-depth look on how the territory system works, be sure to check out my video diving deep into it. And how do you feel about the IGN coverage so far? It's important to note that it is alpha footage, but what did you think about how each weapon performed during the war? Let us all know in the comments below. Thank you very much for checking out the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful night or day, and farewell.